if they thought it would expose them to risk and place them at odds with their municipality. I am sure you will hear many of those comments tonight. I've had 2 experiences obtaining development permits in the EDPA, and I want to share a couple of those experiences. One was a driveway, 3051 McAnally Road, a year of the most unpleasant discussions and refusals to allow me to put a driveway to my home. I was ultimately forced to rip out existing grass and garden and plant native species that I've subsequently found out aren't native species for a cost of $20,000. Further, I was forced to accept a natural state covenant behind my barbecue, an area that I could never use. 3049 McAnally Road. I had sold it to an individual who wanted to build his retirement residence. After 4 months of dealing with staff, they forced him to hire their own approved expert and incredibly expanded the EDPA, calling a rock, a large rock, sticking out of my lawn, Coastal Bluff. He threw up his arms and walked away from a multi-million-dollar purchase. The EDP bylaws cost me time, tens of thousands of dollars in direct out-of-pocket expenses, and decreased the value of my properties by hundreds of thousands of dollars. So what are my issues with the EDPA bylaw in its current form? Number 1, the subjective and discretionary power given to staff. The report written by the Director of Planning on September 17th to the Mayor and Council acknowledges, and I'll call this the report, staff interprets. Staff seems to only accept and take seriously reports from certain favored biologists. Registered professional biologists and technicians are provincially licensed through the College of Applied Biology. See page 4, paragraph 4 of the report. Why are these two, the flawed nature of consultation and the lack of consultation with impacted homeowners. A dear homeowner flyer stuffed in my mailbox in 2011 or so, not even addressed to me, would never be read by me in my household. So I was completely unaware when I went to apply for a driveway permit that I was in the EDPA and had no knowledge of what that meant as outlined on the report, page 5, paragraph 6. There is a conflict of interest in the consultation process that seems to be going on in its current form. Why would any homeowner do anything to risk a development permit that could be issued or denied subjectively by staff? I would suggest that it is a poor process with no clear criteria, no consultation standards, and no public scrutiny. Saanich is urban, suburban, semi-rural, and rural residential. How could one size fit all with this kind of rule? So what are my recommendations? Number 1, staff should be directed by council to accept any report prepared by any BC registered professional biologist in good standing. Number 2, recognizing Saanich is where people live, this is where our homes are. Use carrots, not sticks, to encourage the behavior that's desired. Most importantly, I implore you to start over with a new EDPA bylaw. Do not proceed with the proposed amendments. Clearly define the rules, the process, the oversight, and open, transparent public scrutiny of the application of this bylaw. Directly involve what I understand to be roughly 2,000 homeowners in the EDPA to participate in consultation, true consultation, and the redrafting of a bylaw that balances the rights of property owners and protects what are truly sensitive and significant ecosystems. Let's not try to recreate them piecemeal on private land. Finally, to address the motion that's here today, I'm here to offer my 100% support for option 3, as outlined in the report, removing 4007 and 4011 Rainbow Street from the EDP Atlas. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. My name is Chris Phillips. I live at 4351 Gordon Head Road. Prior to purchasing our property in May 2012, we did our due diligence relative to the property by speaking with 3 representatives at Saanich on 3 separate occasions. The first visit was to check setbacks in the presence of non-conforming structures. We spoke with Mr. Kevin Gill, and there was no mention of an EDPA. The second visit was to check if a subdivision were possible with Mr. Bruce Hacking. Again, nothing was mentioned of an EDPA. The third visit was to find out if we could be connected to a sewer system that both my neighbors were on. I spoke with Mr. Jeff Boucher of Engineering Department, and again, nothing mentioned of an EDPA. We went ahead and closed on a property in May 2012, and neither our realtor nor our attorney knew about any EDPA, nor was it registered on the title. It wasn't until July or August 2012 that during the design process, trying to find out where best to site the house, we became aware of the EDPA. Due to setbacks and EDPA limitations, we were told the house had to be sited in the existing footprint. Bear in mind, this was before any biologist report, and hence no science to back it up. It was purely on the EDPA mapping. The EDPA created the need for a variance, even though we have 1.5 acres of land. It was during this variance application that we were told we need a biologist report. Environmental Department gave us the name of a biologist who turned out to be not a registered biologist, thereby under the EDPA bylaw rules, allowing the Environmental Department to vet his report before accepting it. This is in spite of the fact that there is an association of registered biologists to choose from that do not need to be vetted. These actions smack of cronyism and raises concerns of conflict of interest for biologists that are hired by the landowner, but also have to please Saanich to remain in their good graces. The biologist report ranged from extensively overgrown with invasive species to disturbed areas, that is house, deck, garage, driveway, septic and field. We also applied in 2012 to be included in the sewer system, and over a year later, after going back and forth with environmental and engineering, we were told by Mr. Dwayne Halverson that Saanich would not support our application. We then had to go back to VIHA, who a year earlier had assessed the rocky site now located in the EDPA as extremely difficult to place a septic system. We were told we'd need to hire a sewage engineer due to the restrictions of the EDPA, and Saanich still had to have the biologist check the engineer's work. Having gone through that process, we were told that prior to going to the Mayor and Council for approval, incidentally we weren't allowed to go to the Board of Variance, that we had to have the terms of the covenant ironed out. So I asked our surveyor to accompany to meet with the Environmental Department and discovered that because of the existing house and septic were considered disturbed areas, they could take additional land outside of their own EDPA mapping areas in compensation. In other words, the EDPA grants Saanich all rights to your property, and they can expropriate property outside of the EDPA mapping area if they so wish. Out of approximately 65,000 square feet of land, we were allowed to build on approximately 4,000 square feet. The variances were approved due to hardship, but I still could not apply for a building permit until the covenant was filed and registered. I have since learned that there is no such provision in EDPA bylaw rules. I was also told that Saanich Legal Department would take care of everything related to the covenant and it wouldn't cost us anything. In spite of this, fees for surveyors, lawyers and filing cost an additional $3,000. This brought our tab to date to about $70,000 as a direct consequence of the EDPA. There was apparently no consultation with stakeholders before implementing the EDPA, and that meant no landowners, biologists, appraisers, banks, architects, builders or developers, nor realtors were consulted. If this EDPA was intended by Council to identify at-risk ecosystems on properties that have received applications for new subdivisions, infill construction or redevelopment, it has been implemented by Saanich staff as a simple land grab. Two biologists agree that our property, by the way including Ted Lee here, does not qualify as a sensitive ecosystem and should not even be in the EDPA, let alone have such a restrictive covenant placed on it that takes 62% of our waterfront and in essence locks it down without just cause, compensation or tax relief. The covenant also restricts us from doing anything on our own property, including mowing it, which insurance companies may consider a fire hazard. We have lost all use and enjoyment of the covenanted area, which consists of over half our land, accompanied by an equal loss of pride of ownership. I personally have lost 3 years of my life, paid taxes, mortgage and interest for 3 years when my property should not even have been in the EDPA. To make matters worse, realtors now tell me that if I go ahead and build a new home, the value will be approximately $500,000 to $700,000 less than if there were no covenant or EDPA.
Can I ask you to wrap up your comments, please?
Pardon?
Can I ask you to wrap up your comments, please?
Yes, I will. Just one more sentence. So does the EDPA stand for Environmental Development Permit Area or Expropriation and Devaluation of Property Assets? After wasting 3 years of paying taxes, we now find it makes absolutely no sense to build. In closing, I would just like to say we moved to Canada because we thought this was the greatest country on earth, that Canada had a reputation for protecting people's rights, and we foolishly thought that this also meant our property rights. I think our biggest surprise was to learn that our elected members that actually represent us hold their allegiance to the municipal staff over the voting taxpayer. In many ways, the tail wags the dog, and some council members seem to forget whom they actually represent. I only wish the public had a vote of no confidence to replace all who would recklessly place our largest investment at risk and create huge financial losses for us. This is not like any democracy I've ever known. If no one else other than you, Mr. Mayor, I would like to thank you for your support and leadership.
James Muskelly, 90 Durance Road. I'm a biologist. I've been working primarily in the ecology and conservation of Garryoak ecosystems for the last 16 years. And I haven't visited the Rainbow Street properties. I have no opinion on whether they belong in the EPA or not, but I do want to say a few words about lawns and EPA assessments. Once you start mowing a native meadow, it starts to look like a lawn. The picture here is a native meadow that UVic has been mowing for the last 10 years. If you look at the right time in the spring, on your hands and knees, all the native plants are still there. They would all recover just fine if the mowing stopped. But for most of the year, it looks like just a lawn. This one is particularly diverse. It even supports endangered species, but nothing flowers, nothing passes a few centimeters in height. For most of the year, it appears to be just a lawn. What looks like a lawn in this picture isn't even grass. About half of the front yard of this house is an endangered species called foothill sedge that looks a lot like grass. At this house, the front yard was mowed as a lawn for 30 years, and when the landowner spontaneously decided to mow less, up popped a bunch of native meadow that nobody ever knew was there. It's also worth noting that many of the nicest meadows around, like this one at UVic, have gone through extended periods in their history where they were subject to frequent spring mowing and more or less treated like lawns, and they have recovered. And so the point I'm trying to make is that identifying something as a lawn is not as simple as it sounds. And so if you are tasked with reviewing these reports and making these designations, there are a few points that I think you should keep in mind. First one is timing. What time of year was the field work done? If it was done in any time other than the spring, then that report should have an appropriate amount of uncertainty associated with it. Second, how much of the site had been mowed. Things that have been mowed, especially if they've been mowed recently, are very hard to assess, sometimes impossible to assess. So the report needs to tell you how much of that site was not actually accessible at the time that it was assessed. And the last thing that you need to be looking out for is endangered species. Just because a site looks like lawn, you can't assume that endangered plants are absent. We have a number of endangered species that are highly that survive repeated mowing, and the one that stands out the most there is foothill sedge. It looks like grass, and most of Canada's populations of foothill sedge are located in Saanich. A 2-kilometer radius around Rainbow Street has 7 different known foothill sedge locations in it. So that's something that should be majorly on the radar, and you should see that in the report. So just in conclusion, I do agree that some sites have been added to the EPA in error, just as some sites were missed that should have been included. And I just hope that if you're moving towards the identification and correction of those errors, that you set a high standard for evidence and don't too quickly dismiss sites that may just appear to be lawn. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public that wish to speak? Please come forward.
Good evening, my name is Jessica Ball. I live at 4967 Cordova Bay Road. First, I'd like to reinforce all of the points that have been made by members of the public here tonight. My comments are just specific to the question of mapping and empirical evidence. First, in my assessment, the EDPA was seriously flawed from the outset and should be repealed. The EDPA was adopted by Saanich Council in 2012 at a time when ecological mapping of Saanich had not been completed or was not even significantly near to completion. Further, the science behind the EDPA is in question. I'd like to request that the Saanich Council provide a clear written report to Saanich residents of the empirical evidence of the environmental impact of each component of the EDPA. This report should include references to the scientific studies cited so that residents can review the studies themselves. Until such time as empirical evidence of the potential effectiveness of the EDPA is provided to residents, I'd suggest that the EDPA should be repealed. Thank you.
Mayor Ratfield, worthy councillors, Michael Ross, 3045 McAnally Road. I understand that the EDPA is all about protecting native species. But who are you protecting them against when they no longer exist? Who is the enemy? Am I the enemy who lives 3/4 of a mile away from the lone Gary Oak abutting waterfront property? For this reason, I have my rights expropriated for 100 feet going back on property I've owned legally for 43 years. Let me explain. When we moved in, there was a massive tarmac turnaround on the water side of the property and extensive concrete parking areas. My wife and I had this taken away, soil brought in, and with heavy wooden ladders harnessed to our backs, leveled this area for grasses and flowers. My wife is so unspeakably angry that she is not here tonight. People's land means a lot to them, and somehow the EDPA has come in as an invasive wedge and created a great deal of disharmony and unhappiness in Saanich. Council and Honourable Mayor, you were elected to protect our interests and properties, but somehow, through a poorly advertised bylaw, as Mr. Lee Green explained, a throwaway ad flyer, which any household would pass away, which had affects millions of dollars of damage it has done to many people. It is shameful that this was used as a tool. Concealment and secrecy are not the tools of democracy.
The reason why I asked that is because...
I'm sorry, sir, I did not...
I'm addressing the audience as a whole.
Oh, okay. Quiet, chaps.
It becomes
but somehow...
I'm just going to speak for a second. It becomes difficult for the meeting to progress with the applause because we don't know who's going to speak in favor or against, typically. So if we can hold the applause, as much as everyone's excited about this, and as well as the speakers are speaking tonight, it would facilitate the process, and I think my council members would agree. With that, I'll allow you to continue.
Thank you, all. But somehow, council has become, through this bylaw, the enemy of our property. I mean, this is how I feel. This is how at least 2,000 people, homeowners, are going to feel. And you must understand that. We have small gardens, but Saanich has 169 parks, and more than 184 hectares of parks. The Parks Division doesn't even know how much land they have. They say 184 hectares plus. And now you are demanding even more. This does seem unreasonable. If the intent of this bylaw is truly to protect native species, I respectfully suggest that you stick to where native species be and not antagonize, harass, and devalue the property of 2,000 plus homeowners who are not the enemy. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone members of the public wish to speak, please come forward.
Good evening, Mayor Atwell, Council. My name is Laura Lee. I live at 1513 Cedar Glen Road. May I ask if I have the best talk back, please?
Can't hear you.
Can't hear you.
Use the mic.
The speaker has a presentation, and we're going to just fire it up, and then she will continue.
Thank you. My husband and I have lived in Saanich for 30 years, raising our family here. We support restoration where appropriate and have volunteered for a number of years helping with invasive species removal from Mount Douglas Park. I have a Bachelor of Science degree in biology, and I have had respect and appreciation for nature and the outdoors my entire life. I have a few photos and comments to share with you, followed by some further points I wish to make. It's not opening.
Try double click again.
Okay. Great, thank you. This is a photo taken on our neighbor's property. Our son was nearly 2 years old at the time. He is now 28. At that time, there were hundreds of camas plants and other native plant species here. This area of our neighbor's property has remained undisturbed by human activity for the last 26 years. And here's another photo of that same area. You can see there are a lot of camas, and the broom is just starting to come into play there. This photo was taken within the last few months at the same location as the previous photo. There are only a few camas plants left here, and the area is dominated by invasive grass species and Scotch broom. This same degradation is occurring in our Saanich parks. We have been walking in Mount Douglas Park weekly, if not daily, for the last 30 years, and have been able to observe firsthand over a short period of time the loss of Garry Oak Meadows to invasive species. This is a recent photo taken in Knockin Hill Park to illustrate what Mount Douglas Park used to look like 20 to 30 years ago on the upper south and southwest facing slopes. This photo and the two following illustrate how these areas of Mount Douglas Park are now dominated by invasive grass species and Scotch broom, with much fewer camas and other native wildflowers remaining. These photos were taken in the spring. So you can see the invasive grasses in the foreground. This used to be full of camas when we walked in the park 20, 30 years ago. And here you can see, again, invasive grasses and the Scotch broom. We also frequent Glencoe Cove Park, which according to a Saanich map, has many areas of rare and endangered species. These areas are outlined in red. Glencoe Cove Park also has a coastal bluff sensitive ecosystem mapped by the SEI and is in the EDPA. Despite the park's sensitive ecosystem designation, public are allowed to walk all over the endangered species and the coastal bluff. There are no fences or signs to indicate to the public that the area is protected. There are no designated areas of protection. The points I wish to make are as follows. Invasive species, especially invasive grass species, are quickly and efficiently outcompeting the native plant species in Saanich parks and elsewhere within Saanich, even on undisturbed sites. Saanich parks contain the greatest percentage of remaining areas of highest biodiversity, though they are becoming degraded rapidly. I believe that the priority and focus of protecting and restoring sensitive ecosystems and natural areas should be within our Saanich parks. It is unfair and unrealistic to require or force private property owners or future owners to restore areas on their property when restoration in Saanich parks is sadly lacking and protection of endangered species is not occurring. Saanich is not setting a good example or leading by example in its own parks. I believe that lawn and garden under Garry Oak trees is not a sensitive ecosystem, and that properties with those attributes, such as the subject properties, should not be included in the EDPA. I believe that all private property owners should be encouraged, not forced, to remove invasive plant species and or plant native species on their property and or maintain any sensitive ecosystems that may exist on their properties. I believe that the District of Saanich should lead by example by doing restoration in our Saanich parks. Encouragement, not force, will result in a more positive attitude and approach towards good stewardship of our parks and our private lands. I appreciate the opportunity to speak this evening. Thank you.
Thank you for coming to the microphone. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak? Please come forward.
Thank you, Mayor and Councillors. The presentation we just had, sorry I'm not prepared here. I wasn't planning on saying anything, but I've been inspired to say something now.
Could you give us your name and your address?
Oh, sorry, Kristen Miskelly. I'm a local biologist who specializes in Garry Oak ecosystems. I fully agree that we should be restoring habitat in Saanich parks, 100%. I've been a little startled this evening by the amount of anger in the room about Saanich's efforts to develop a program to help protect local ecosystems on private property. I think it's an excellent idea, and that given the loss of Garry Oak ecosystems in the region, that depending on parks alone for their conservation isn't enough, and that we also need to look to private properties. I can't speak specifically to the properties being discussed tonight because I haven't been to them. But I'd like to address the notion of ownership of properties. A lot of the concerns are financial based, about the amount of money that someone can earn from their property in their lifetime. And amidst all the anger here and the hype, remember that these properties are going to exist long past the owner and past our own lifetimes, and that we have to think about the fact that we're the stewards of the sites, even if we own them. And so for thinking about the people of the future and the people who then come to live at those sites, to maintain as much ecosystem health as we can, and to continue working on the EDPA to figure out where those sites are. I noticed, and this is with respect Mayor Atwell, but when Ms. Pollard was giving her presentation, I felt like you weren't paying very much attention to it, and I felt like...
Let the speaker express herself. Thank you.
I do mean this with respect, in sincerity. I think you might have even been texting and didn't notice when her presentation had ended. And I'm very concerned about that. It really shows, you can hear how excited everyone is. They're angry at me right now for saying that to you, for example. And I don't want that kind of energy to persuade your thinking as counselors when you're addressing issues like this. Because it's extremely important. It's the most important questions of our lifetime about keeping habitat.
Please. Go ahead, you still have time.
I also think it's interesting, this idea of the devaluing of the properties. I do hear what the realtor said, in that when someone can't resell their property for the same value it was, and at the same time, you think about places like the Highlands, or the richest neighborhoods, or the properties that have the most